The idea that the world is round is an idea that the Greeks came up with first, right? We all know this, but it's not true. The ancient Egyptians had figured this out years before, and in fact, a king, a pharaoh, named Necho wanted to circumnavigate Africa, and he sent a mission of Phoenicians to do it for him, and Herodotus documents this. We know that Necho's son was saddened by depleted or failed structures in Egypt and removed Necho's name from the history books, at least tried, from temples. This is as of a result of his efforts in order to circumnavigate Africa, in which the Phoenicians gave some details, like the fact that Africa is completely surrounded by water. This type of detail is something that you wouldn't have known long time ago before people had gone around Africa. There were all kinds of theories about a separate continent even after this eventuality. And since now we have hindsight, we can see that Necho was probably right. And this is what Herodotus had to say. I wonder, therefore, at those who have described the limits of the divided Libya, Asia, and Europe, for the difference between them is not trifling. For in length Europe extends along both of them, but with respect to width it is evidently not to be compared. Libya shows itself to be surrounded by water, except so much as of it as borders upon Asia. Necho, king of Egypt, was the first whom we know of that proved this. He, when he ceased digging the canal leading from the Nile of the Arabian Gulf, sent Persian Phoenicians in ships with orders to sail back through the Pillars of Hercules into the northern sea. And so, to return to Egypt, the Phoenicians accordingly, setting out from the Red Sea, navigated the southern sea. When autumn came, they went ashore and sowed the land by whatever part of Libya they happened to be sailing, and waited for harvest. Then, having reaped the corn, they put to sea again. When 2 years had thus passed, in the third, having doubled the Pillars of Hercules, they arrived in Egypt. Before I carry on reading, I have to explain something real quick. At this point, Herodotus is about to doubt something that these Phoenicians were right about, which is that the sun was on their right side as they circumnavigated the globe. So, this is what they say afterwards. This is what he says. When 2 years had thus passed, in the third, having doubled the Pillars of Hercules, they arrived in Egypt, and relating what to me does not seem credible, but may to others, that as they sailed round Libya they had the sun on their right hand. Thus was Libya first known. Subsequently, the Carthaginians say that Libya is surrounded by water, for Satispas, son of Tispus, one of the Achaemenidae, did not sail round Libya, though sent for that very purpose, but dreading the length of the voyage and the desolation, returned home, and did not accomplish this task, which his mother imposed upon him, for he had violated a virgin daughter of Zopyrus, son of Megzabub. Whereupon, when he was about to be impaled, another person that he mentions is Xerxes, who wanted to go around Africa, but he turned back. You can see here it says Xerxes, having agreed on these terms, um, sailed through the Pillars of Hercules, and having sailed though through and doubled the Cape of Libya, whose name is Soleus, he steered to the southward, but after traversing a vast extent of sea in many months, when he found that he had still more to pass, he turned back and sailed away from Egypt for Egypt. Okay, but how did the ancient Egyptians do this? Well, one of the mathematical implementations that they put in was celestial navigation. And one of the mathematical things that you have to do when you're doing celestial navigation is to use Pythagoras' theorem. But wait a minute, didn't Pythagoras invent this in Greece? What does this have to do with the ancient Egyptians? Wouldn't this leave the ancient Egyptians completely stranded? Well, it would if you don't know where Pythagoras got the theorem. Well, according to NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, which is based in the United States, actually, the theorem has been known in many cultures by many names for many years. Pythagoras, for whom the theorem is named, lived in ancient Greece 2,500 years ago. It is believed that he learned the theorem during his studies in Egypt. The Egyptians probably knew of the relationship for 1,000 years before Pythagoras. The Egyptians knew of this relationship of the triangle with sides in the ratio 3:4:5. That's NASA. And also, a lot of mathematicians that I've read into also believe this because Pythagoras' theorem would be obviously useful in the pyramids, but it was also useful in the sky, and it was useful in dividing pieces of land so that it could belong to this guy. Because people don't know this, but ancient Egypt had strong laws about whose land belonged to who, when you paid taxes, leniency, and all this other thing when it came to farming. And so different people of different sections were allotted land, and knowing these deep mathematical things really helped. Necho's mission was in the 5th century BC. These Romans later copied him, or did what he did, or tried to do what he did 600 years later. And in AD 39, you can see people like King Juba or Pliny the Elder try to traverse as far into Africa as they can, sub Saharan Africa, if you want to call it that. Connections like these led people like Isaac Newton to speculate that the Earth's circumference was already calculated by the ancient Egyptians and that its secrets lay deep into the pyramids. And that's why he studied them up and down for the secrets of the size of the earth. But to return to Pliny the Elder, we have to read his full description of the African parts that he said he had traveled to. The king of Egypt knew no use of fire. Some writers have reported that in the country near the marshes, from whence the Nile hath its source, there inhabit a nation of Pygmy, but where we left off there is a continual range of mountains, all red, as if they were burning. Beyond Meroe there is a country lying above the Troglodytia and the Red Sea, where 3 days' journey from Napata towards the Red Sea. In most places they save rainwater for their ordinary use. All the country between is very abundant in gold. All beyond this region is inhabited by the Atoboli, a people of Ethiopia. The Maghrebi, whom some have named Adiabere, lie over against Meroe. and have a town bearing the name of Apollo. Part of them are nomads who live on elephant's flesh. Just against them, in a part of Africa, are the Macrobi. Again, beyond the Megabari are the Memnones and Devali, and 20 days' journey from them, the Cretans. Beyond them are the Dochi and the Gimnites, who are always naked. Soon after you find the Andrea, the Mythea, the Massagebes, the Heparea, of a black color, but who paint their bodies with a kind of red chalk called rubrica. But upon a part of Africa are the Medimni. Beyond then are nomads who feed on the milk of Cynocephaly, and the Olabi and Sirbote, who are reported to be 8 cubits high. Not a speck of whiteness mentioned at any point. And you can see with Ibn Battuta that he mentions white people about 1,000 years later only as an exception in the Black Lands, which we'll talk about soon enough.